This crazy story took place in and around Chicago in the year 2022. Friends, before watching the video, support by liking and subscribing to the channel. The deed is done. Paul got married, got a young wife, but the wife's mother, angry, got him. Never thought, never guessed that everything would be fine, but whether because of the fact that the mother-in-law was a divorcee or maybe because of his character, but the relationship between mother-in-law and son-in-law did not work out. Everything was aggravated by the fact that the young people lived together with the mother-in-law. More precisely, this young family lived in the mother-in-law's apartment. No, the mother-in-law did not oppress the son-in-law openly in real life, but at every convenient and even not quite convenient case hinted that there are real men who have hands and grows from where it is necessary and earns a lot. Pavel was tired of her hints, and she also took the fashion of coming into the room with young men at inappropriate moments of intimacy. So Paul put the question to his young wife, Elizabeth. It was either me or her. Either we move to another apartment or we get a divorce. And Elizabeth both felt sorry for her mother, Laura, and didn't really want to run away with her young husband. Tears settled the matter, and Paul accepted it. This was his burden, and he would carry that cross until his mother-in-law or himself died. But it was not at all likely that he would outlive his mother-in-law. She was healthy enough for a whole squad of astronauts, though she made up illnesses for herself daily and hourly. And Laura's mother-in-law had a country house, her love and pride. And the mother-in-law harnessed her son-in-law, though not quite, in her opinion, skillful, on weekends to go to the country house. And there, in the absence of his wife, she tortured the boy as best she could. The boy Pavel wriggled, upset. Man is so organized that he needs to share with others at least grief, at least joy. So he shared the problem with his friends, and the guys advised him to seduce his mother-in-law. Either she will help you, and you will be like an obedient guy, or you will divorce your wife, Elizabeth. There is no third way. Pavel stubbornly refused. How could I? She's my mother-in-law. Yes, I don't argue. She's still very nice, but she's still my mother-in-law. And more experienced men explained to Pavlik that there are few options. The main thing is not to be afraid. And the fact that this mother-in-law is a relative of his wife will make her even more dear. In general, they planted a spark of doubt in Pavel's soul. The next weekend, Paul, loaded with things, goes with his mother-in-law to the country house. His wife, Elizabeth, due to pregnancy in 2 weeks, categorically refused to go with them, preferring to visit various beauty salons. And Paul showed his character that his mother-in-law would break him. Once he gave in to his wife's tears and showed his weakness, and now he will suffer all his life. They worked for a while, rinsed themselves under the summer shower Paul had made from an old barrel, and ate supper on the deck near the small garden house. After dinner, Paul sat on the porch steps and took a sweet drag on his cigarette. Just then his mother-in-law Laura appeared and began to say something to her son-in-law. And when Paul tried to put a word in his defense, the effect was as if he had poured gasoline on a blazing fire. And then something clicked in his head, and Paul embraced his mother-in-law Laura, sitting next to him, and gagged her with a kiss. Apparently, the mother-in-law, who had not expected such an act from her son-in-law, was dumbfounded and did not even make an attempt to resist. Thus began the story of their love in nature. The unpleasant evening conversation between mother-in-law and son-in-law was forgotten. The mother-in-law's dissatisfaction with the fact that the son-in-law could earn more was forgotten. Everything was forgotten and forgiven then at the dacha. The morning found them sleeping on a cramped bed, tired but happy. Even the old tights, in which the mother-in-law constantly worked on the plot, were replaced by a dress. She looked young and beautiful. Where had the evil mother-in-law gone? She was already the sweetest woman, cheerful, kind, and loving to her son-in-law. My wife, Elizabeth, was terribly surprised at such a strong and obvious change in her mom named Laura. For a long time, she had been trying to get Paul to admit what had happened, that Mom had changed so drastically. Now, At the slightest hint of shame and embarrassment threatening her son-in-law from her daughter, a lightning-fast peace enforcement operation followed. And even pregnancy did not save Paul's wife Elizabeth from the wrath of Laura's mother, and Paul was happy and no longer wanted to leave his mother-in-law because life had gotten better. Their secret affair continued throughout the summer months when Paul and Laura managed to escape to the country house. There were many passionate dates and tender moments between the odd couple in the cramped bed. Although Laura still rebuked Paul for his lapses, her tone softened, and there was a glint of tenderness in her eyes. As Elizabeth's belly became round from the baby, she turned inward on herself, focusing on the new life developing within her. She didn't notice that her mother had a new trait in her gait, or that Paul was taking extra care to repair the car for weekend trips. Unbeknownst to her, she had built a nest, and a secret love was blossoming right under her nose. When the first frost hit, Paul complained about having to close the cottage for the winter. Laura promised that in the spring, they would resume their romance and find moments of misplaced pleasure even in her city apartment. When she said goodbye to Paul that fall day, tears of parting stood in her eyes. Though the cold weather had come, the fire between them still burned. Throughout the endless winter, they exchanged secret letters and fervent glances when Elizabeth wasn't looking at them. In the new year, Elizabeth gave birth to a son, and Paul's heart flared with love for the new child. Still, he found an excuse to get away from his wife's bedside and snuck into Laura's room to share the news. She hugged him as he shed tears of joy, marveling that this woman who had been his tormentor was now his loving princess. When the spring sun came out, Paul rushed to the cottage to prepare their love nest for Laura's return. The winter without her had been torture, and he longed for her touch. Once Elizabeth and the baby were tucked in, Laura and Paul escaped to the cottage, where they fell into each other's arms. The long months of separation had only intensified their passion. While engaging in passion with Laura in the fresh air under the budding trees, Paul realized that he felt at home, and he felt good. This place, this woman, was where he belonged. His life was reborn here the way the earth is renewed in the spring. While Elizabeth nursed their baby in the postpartum haze, Paul's world blossomed with vibrant colors in the arms of his mother-in-law, who had become the one who also gave warmth.